Oh, okay, so to Gemara. V'chachamim ayrim maga treifa shchuta. Zok to Gemara. Treifa shchuta b'mitam. We know that if you shecht an animal that's a treifa, it won't be tummy. It's not an avela. Zok to Gemara. As a matter of fact, there is the Rabban Nikatuma that exists even by a treifa shchuta, kid avula de Shmuel, just like the father of Shmuel, the Amar of Shmuel. Treifa sheshachta metama b'mikdash. Tama by hectares. There's a little bit of a discussion of what exactly is the tumah. But also learn that if you have hektish and it comes into contact with treifa, the shechted, it will become tummy, become possible. However, that also learned treifa shchuta means if the carbon itself became a treifa, then it will be tummy. So this is the Mishnah records very briefly the discussion between Meir and the Chachamim as to whether or not this limb sticking out will have too much to it. So the Rabbanim told her Meir, Mama Tzinu Betreifa, Shechita Mitarasa, Hab Shchitas Behema Titaris Uber. So therefore, you Reb Meir, why would you say it's a nevela? It should be just like a treifa sheshachta, and it should not be a nevela. Tanya, we have a brayso that's going to elaborate more on this conversation. Amar lahen Reb Meir, v'chimi tiharu la'ever zeh midei nevela. What was matar this aver from nevela? So Reb Meir told the you're telling me that it's Torah from the Vela. Why? Shechita, because the Shechita of his mother worked. Well, if that's the case, you can't split it. If you're going to tell me that the Shechita applies for the hand that was sticking out, Lagabe being materit from Tuma, well then go all the way. I mean, the Shechita works. Let it be mutter b'achilas. Amrullah, they told him, no. Harbin matzelas. Al she'enei gufa, Yosy gufa. It's normal where the shechita of the mother will work for something that's not part of her guf more than her own guf. Where do we see this illustrated? If you cut a piece off of the over and you left it in the mother, and then they shifted the mother, mutar b'achila. Those pieces are mutar b'achila. But if they cut up a piece of the mother herself, and it was left inside her when they shechted her, also b'achila. So the question is, what does that have anything to do with her Meir's time? Meir's time was, if the shechita should work, it should work. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So what is the Rabbanan responding that it's easier for the shechita to be mitar for an object than to be mitar the mother herself? That answer has nothing to do with Meir's kasha. The answer to that is that there's a lot of shakla mitaria discussion missing, which the Gemara is going to fill in for us. Then everything will make perfect sense. So to Gemara, Micah Amar, what in the world is the Rabbanan talking? Amar Rava, Zok Rava, Amar La Kadi, or there are some who say it's Kadi who said this. Chisura Mechsura There, the Brisa quoted Reb Meir's kasha, and the final response of the Chachamim, but the Brisa didn't quote the entire discussion, and once we do, it'll become Zok to Gemara. This is what happened. Amar lahen Reb Meir. Reb Meir said, "V'chimi taru la'ever seh midei depei." You Rabbanan are saying that if a zoyvad the shechita will help for the aver that was sticking out, they won't pay nevela. Why? Because of shechita sima. So that means you're telling me that the shechita sima is working for that aver. Well, if it works for that aver, it came tatiranu b'achila. So now the aver should be mutar b'achila. Amru lai, they told them no. Not everything that's not a nevela you're allowed to eat. The proof is with a treifa. Treifa is a chiach. Every treifa that you shech, the shechita only works part way. Because shechita mitarasa midei nevela. But the matirasa bachila. But it's not matir bachila. So why should the aver sticking out be any different? Say the shechita works partially. It's going to be retired from the vela, but it will not make it permissible to eat. So Amr Lahen, so Reb Meir responded back to them, no, you can't bring the Uriah. Loyim tiara, you cannot change the
Yeah, but it's exposed here.
What?
There's an arrow.
Okay. Loyim tiara, shchita streifa, oisadavar, sheigufa. Just because the shchita of a treifa will be mitaher, what it itself is, meaning if you shecht the mother, if you shecht of an animal, you shecht an animal, even though it's a treifa, but you're shechting the animal itself, there the shechita will allow for the animal itself to make it ois tuma. But don't stretch it to say to taris a iber, davar she'ena gufa. You can't stretch it to say that the shechita should be able to be metayer the iber, which is not part of its body. So Reb Meir's argument is very, very simple. Just because you see treifa is impacted by the shechita, that's because you're shechting in itself. But where do you ever find that when you shecht A, it's going to be mitahar B? And that's Reb Meir's time. Now, the Rabbanon's final answer makes perfect sense. Amr Loi, you find very often that the shechita of a mother will help for an external body like the uber, yet it won't help for herself. Amr Loi, harbe matzelas al she'en gufa, yosem gufa, shareshaninu chaydich min uber shebemayah will be mutter, bachila, so the shechita of the mother will work to be matir, a foreign object like the uber or the piece of the uber, but minat chula minat kloyos, also bachila. So you see the shechita of the mother sometimes can have a greater impact on an external item than the own mother's own organs herself. So therefore, it remains a stickle on a stalemate where their opponent holds you can learn from treifa that the shechita works partially, or Meir holds no such thing. Zok the Gemara. Tanya Nami Hach. We learned in the Brisa, another Brisa that clears up the discussion here of Meir and the Chachamim. Amar Lani of Meir. Tiaru la'ever midei neveh. He asked, why would this aver that was sticking out, why would it be tar from the vela? Zok the Gemara. Amar Lani told him, Shechita Zimai. So Amar and Kaini said, if Shechita works, then Tati read the Bachila, it should be completely mutter. Amar Lani responded, it's not a kasha. Sometimes the shechita will work part way. Amar lahen, in tira shechita's treifa, I saw if the shechita of a treifa could be matar it because it's in itself, but now Reb Meir adds another tidbit of information. The esa ever hamadul dolba. So now we're talking either about a treifa that you check. The animal will at least not be nevela. Or what if you have an animal that has a limb that's hanging off by a piece of skin or by a piece of meat? So it's completely severed, it's just hanging off of it. The halacha is if you shech the mother, if you shech the animal, even that piece hanging off of it will be mutter to eat. There's a davar shakufa. So remember that just because when you shech an animal, it will, if it's treifa, the shechita will work to be mitar in itself. Or if one of its avarim is hanging off of it, hanging from a thread, the shechita will be matter it. That's because davar shagufa. That's part of the animal itself that you shecht it. Titar is a uber she'enoi gufa. Who said that you could stretch it to say that the shechita will also be mitar the aver of an uber that's not part of its goof. And they responded, Harbi Matzelas al Shein Gufa, Yosef Gufa, Sharei Shaninu Chaytich in the Ubership in Me'ah, Mutter Bachila, Minatchol, Minatchloyais, Aser Bach. So, this last brisa that we just quoted opens up a whole new discussion, which is going to be the discussion that we're going to finish the plot, and that is an aver hamaduldo. If you have an aver that's hanging off of an animal, so the animal's leg got chopped off, but it's hanging by a thread, and you shech the animal, you're allowed to eat that leg that's hanging off. That becomes niter b'shchita. Now, there's going to be a discussion. The Gemara is going to bring up a new term very shortly. The term that it's going to bring up is shchita oisa nipa. When you shecht an animal and it has an aver hanging off of it, do we say that the shchita will work for that aver and make it mutter b'achila, like we just quoted from Reb Meir the Brisa? Or do you say shchita oisa nipa? When you shecht an animal, it simultaneously makes it as if that hanging aver was totally cut off. And that means it never received the heter of shchita, and therefore it remains an aver min achai. So that is what we're going to be discussing. So clearly the Brisa quotes Reb Meir as saying that if the aver is hanging off, the shchita will work for it. But the Gemara is going to bring other shitas that hold shchita oisa nipul. When you shecht something, it makes it as if all the pieces that are hanging off of it were separate prior to the heter shchita, and they would be able in achai. So let's see what the Gemara says. Amar Rab Shimon ben Lakish. Lakish said, "K'machloikis be'ubrit," the same machloikis that Reb Meir and the Chachamim have by an uber that's sticking its hand out, whether or not to get heter shchita, whether or not it'll be ois nevela. Hach machloikis be'varin, that same machloikis will exist by the aver of the animal itself. That doesn't seem to be consistent with what we learned a moment ago. Because what we learned a moment ago is Reb Meir said no matter what, the aver hamaduldo will get the heter shchita. Clearly, Rish Lakish, you're going to have to see how Rish Lakish is going to interpret the Brisa we just learned. So Reb Shimon ben Lakish says, "K'machloikis be'urban kach machloikis be'varin." Rabbi Yochanan Amar, "Machloikis be'aver, be'aver de uber." Only machloikis between Reb Meir and the Chachamim is by the aver of the uber, meaning, well, our case in our Mishnah, where the uber took its hand out. There's a machloikis where the Rabbanan holds the heter shchita works. But if you have an aver hanging off of a behema, the shchita won't work. So now we have to figure out how that's going to fit into the discussion between Rabbi and the Chum that we had in our Brisa, because it seems like it's not going to fit. So let's take a close look at the Gemara. So the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yosy bar Chanina. My time in Rabbi Yochanan. What's the svara of Rabbi Yochanan? Alibo de Rabban. So let's think. Rabbi Yochanan said that everybody holds an Abraham Adulto, the Shechita will not work for, but it will work. It will work for the baby. So why would you say such a thing? So to Gemara, I'll tell you why. The baby whose hand is stuck out of the mother's womb can pull his hand back in, and then it'll be a perfect Shechita. But a Abraham Adulto less than the Kanta, the Chazara. It can no longer heal up. Once the aver is hanging from a thread, it's impossible that it will heal up, and therefore, it's going to be worse. That's why Rabbi Yochanan could say that where there's the Rabbanan say that it'll get a heter shchita, that's by an aver of an uber that's sticking out. It's not so bad. But an aver maduldo, there the heter shchita won't heal. So Gemara Mason. Gemara asked the following question, and this is what we were struggling with right away, how it fits into how Reb Meir responded to the Chachamim. What did Reb Meir say? Reb Meir, Lo im tiara shchitas treifa oisa v'esever meduldalba davar shagufa titter es ober shdavar she'ena gufa. So what does Reb Meir say? Reb Meir saying shchitas treifa will be mitar the animal, that's treifa, and everybody agrees that if you shecht an animal that has an aver hanging off of it, that it will be a good shchita. That's not so simple that it'll be a good shechita. We just had a whole machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan said according to the nobody it's a good shechita, and Rish Lakish said it's not a good shechita according to Rabbi Meir. So we're going to have to see what this means. So let's go on to the base. Did Ahmed base load by you?
Hmm? Yeah.
Did it load?
Is it low?
Sorry?
No. Well, you're asking me. I'm not sure what you're asking. I
I
can
just want
see
to
on
make sure
this.
that it showed up on the screen.
Oh, yes, it's there. Yeah.
Okay, good. So Bishlam al Shimon Lakish, Bishlam according to Shimon Lakish, who holds that there's a machlokes, where Reb Meir holds it doesn't work. Reb Meir holds it doesn't because Shlakish said kamachlokes beubarin kach machlokes beivarin. So Reb Shimon Lakish learns in the Chachamim that an Abraham Adoldol, the Shechita will work for it, and he's learning that in Reb Meir, the Abraham Adoldol, the Shechita wouldn't work for it. So the problem is, according to Shimon Lakish, what does Reb Meir say that Shechita will help by an Abraham Adoldol? Reb Meir himself holds that Shechita will not work for an Abraham Adoldol. So the Gemara b'Shleimel Reb Shimon Lakish l'Devrayim v'Amaluk. Reb Meir is commenting according to the Chacham. My personal opinion of Reb Meir is that the Shechita will not work. Question is, you Rabbana, Ella. But according to the Rabbanon, you Rabbanon hold that the Shechita will work for an Aver Hamadoldo, and it'll be mattered completely. So according to you, that the Shechita works for the Uber sticking its hand out, it should be mattered completely. So according to Rish Lakish, we have a way of massaging to understand what Rameir was talking about in his response to the comment. According to Rabbi Yochanan, everybody agrees. According to Rabbi Yochanan, everybody agrees that an Abraham Adoldo does not get the kashrus of the shechita. An Abraham Adoldo will not be edible, will not be kosher. It'll be an Abraham Menachai. It'll be Tomei. So how could Reb Meir, in his response to the Chachamim, say that an Abraham Adoldo will receive the Heter Shechita, where he doesn't agree with that, and the Chachamim don't either agree with that? So how could Reb Meir have possibly said that the way Rabbi Yochanan understood the machlokes? Zog to Gemara, Ella Rabbi Yochanan Kasha. Well, we're going to have to change what the machlokes is between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. We must have misunderstood it. There must be a different shot to the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. And now we'll learn the revised version. Rabbi Shimon Lakish, the machlokes beubarin kach machlokes beivar. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish's opinion didn't change. Same halacha by Uber, where it will be an avela, according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. By an Abraham Adoldo, it will also be an avela. According to Meir and according to the Chachamim, it'll work. It'll work. Yochanan Amar machlokes be'ever de Uber. The only place where the Rabbanon say that the Heter Shechita will work for the Aver, that's only the Aver of the Uber. But by a limb that's hanging off skin, meaning everybody agrees it would be a good Shechita. So Rabbi Yochanan didn't say that by Abraham Adoldo it would not work. He said, Punkt verkehr. By Abraham Adoldo it will absolutely yes. So now it works very beautifully. Reb Meir told the Chachamim, you agree that the Shechita will be mitayr a treifa, and you agree that a Shechita will work for the Abraham Adoldo. Because everybody, according to Rabbi Yochanan, everybody agrees that the Shechita works for the Abraham Adoldo, and the Uber sticking its hand out, that's where there's a machlokes. That's where Reb Meir says that it's going to be Tomei, and the Rabbanan say it's going to be like a tray for about. Rabbi Yosy bar Chanina, My time is Rabbi Yochanan. I'll leave it to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yochanan, I'll leave it to Rabbi Meir. Who says that the Shechita will not work for the Uber at all, and the Uber will be an Avela, but the Shechita will work to be matter the Eber Madudal. Why would you make that distinction? So Gemara, very simple. Hi Kufa, I love Gufa. The Gufa of the mother herself, or the Gufa of an animal itself, if you shecht it, it'll even cover the Abraham Adult, because that's part of the animal itself. But the Uber is a different being. There, the Shechita wouldn't work. About Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosy. Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosy said, Amar Rav Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Hakoil moedim shemisa oisenim. The ain't shchita oisenim. Everybody agrees that shchita does not make nipple. So to review, what does it mean shchita doesn't make nipple? It means if you had an Abraham Adoldol and you shechted it, we say that the heter shchita will work for that Abraham Adoldol and you'll be able to eat it. But if it dies, if the animal dies, does not get shechted, there it's oisenipol, and we don't say that this limb has the din of a nevela, because when the animal dies, the animal's a nevela. Rather, it'll have a din of ever minachai. Now, we need to understand what's the difference. What's the difference? So, again, hakoil moedim shemita shenibel v'shchita shenibel, and therefore, it'll have a din of ever minachai and ever medodol, and it will not have a din of nevela. What's the difference? Dr. Rashi, there's a very distinct difference. Nevela is actually more chomer than ever minachai. And let's look at Rashi right opposite the Gilyon Hashas. Shamisa Isanipol, Abraham Adonal Behema. And Behema had an Eber hanging off of it, Umesh, and it died. So now it becomes a nevela. Hamisa Mapelas Oisan. We say that the death of the animal makes it as if the Abraham Adonal was completely severed, and it does not become a nevela. The Einai Tame, Abraham in a nevela. It won't be tummy like any Abraham and Nevela would be tummy. Look at Abraham and Achai. What's the difference? The tummy is tummy. What distinction in halacha is there between the Abraham and Achai and the Nevela? Zokt Rashi v'hefer sheyesh beineim. There's a distinct halachic difference between an Abraham and Achai and a Nevela. Amina ba'arba roitiv. The Gemara says in Arba roitiv. Abraham and Achai. Basar hamafurish aparish menutar. Let's say you had an Abraham and Achai. An Abraham and Achai is tummy, but if a piece of meat gets cut off of that Abraham, so you have a leg that was severed from an animal when it was alive. That leg is Abraham and Achai. It's tummy, the navatuma. But if you cut a piece of meat off that Abraham and Achai, that meat will not be tummy at all. However, the Abraham tummy look at your Abraham Chullin. Abraham and Achai is only the tummy when it's an Abraham and Achai, a full Abraham. Basar Gidin Vatomis when it's complete. Basar the Gidin Vatomis is a complete Abraham. Avol Nevela, of the whole Nevela is tummy with a Avatuma, even Kazais Mimena tummy Avatuma. So therefore, if you have an Abraham that was medaltal, was hanging off, and then the animal dropped it, although the whole animal is going to be an Nevela, the Aver remains Aver in a high, and if a piece of meat gets taken off of that Aver, it will not be tummy. So that is the distinction. So Nisa Oisanipol, but ain't Shechita Oisanipol. We check something, we say that the head of Shechita will go on the Aver Amadol. So but my asking, what is the specific case we're referring to? You know, we have a case where Misa Oisanipol, but ain't Shechita Oisanipol. What are we talking about? Ilema be'Aver the Uber. If we're talking about the Aver of the Uber sticking out, Miflik Plik, we know there's a machlokes about it. You can't say it's simple that ain't Shechita Oisanipol and the Shechita will work for the leg sticking out. There's a machlokes for Meir and the Chachamim whether or not that will work. So to Gemara, Ella must be speaking be'Aver the Behemoth. It's speaking about the Aver of the Behemoth itself, meaning, like we discussed a minute ago, where there's an Aver Amadodol and the animal dies, that's when that will be an Aver Minachai. And if the animal was shechted, we'll say that it gets Heter Shechita. Period. Right to Gemara, Rabbi Yosy Bar Chanina just said this huge chiddush. I'm sorry, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, just said this big chiddush. And I call my name Shemisa Oisedibel Ben Shechita Oisedibel. Frank Gemara, why would I need Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef to tell me this in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? There's a brisa that says both of these halachas black and white. So why do I need the Gemara to tell me I'm a forger brisa? Zot Gemara Misa Tanina. We have a brisa that says that if an animal dies with an Abraham Aduldo, it'll be an Abraham and Chai, won't be an Avela. And Shechita Nina, we also have a brisa that says if you shecht an animal, it's a nice and nipple, and the Shechita will work for the Abraham Aduldo. Now we're going to get into the details. Misa Tanina. Where did we have a brisa that says that if an animal with an Abraham Aduldo dies, an Abraham and Chai? So tomorrow I'll tell you. Zok the Gemara as follows. Misa Tadina. Mesa ha-behema, if the behema dies, ha-basar tarchech. So we have a mission that says, it's a brisa. If the behema dies, and it had an Abraham adulto, the basar of the animal needs hechsher. Now, hechsher means that it's not tamei tumas nevela. If it's tamei tumas nevela, it doesn't need to be hokshur or kabel tuma. It's tamei nevela and it's an abatuma. Hokshur means that it's only an idol, and it could only be kabel tuma if it got hechsher by coming in contact with one of the zayin mashka. So in the brayta that mesa behema a basar tzarch hechsher, that's telling me if it's mesa behema, the behema is not in the vela. The mesa behema a basar tzarch hechsher because it's not in the vela. Ever mitame mishum ever minachal. And the ever hanging is tamei al ever minachal. The einay mitame mishum ever minanavela. And it won't be tamei al ever minavela. Ever of meir. So what do we see from here? Let's see Rashi. Mesa behema. So how you bought ever ubasar middle dollar. So you had a behema that had an ever hanging off and a basar hanging off. It was in bad shape. The leg was hanging off, and besides that, another piece of meat was hanging off of it. So the halacha of the aver hanging off of it is different from the meat hanging off of it. Look, Rashi, Shayaba aver ubasar middle dolin, aver bifnei atzmai ubasar bifnei atzmai. So, like I said, we have an animal that's in bad shape. One of its limbs is hanging off of it, and it has a piece of meat hanging off of it. Umishna hi be'ha'arba right. This is a Mishnah, kind of bright. It's a Mishnah in Arba right. We're going to learn later the Masechta. So what does the Mishnah say? What halacha? A basar tzarch hechsher. The basar that's hanging off of the animal is not tamei b'tumas nevela. The actual animal, of course, is tamei b'tumas nevela. It died without shechita. But a piece of meat that was hanging off of this animal that is a nevela is not a nevela, and it's tzarch hechsher to be able to be mekabel tuma. So let's see Rashi. A basar tzarch hechsher mayim shem yiga b'tuma. If it touches tuma after it was hoksher yikabeleno, it'll be mekabel tuma. Why is that? Why isn't it an avela? It says the misa and nipol. It proves that when the animal died, it's as if it severed that piece of meat off of it, and when a piece of meat is severed off of an animal before it becomes an avela, it's not going to be an avela. It's just going to be a piece of meat that's not an avela. It's just going to be a piece of meat that's not an avela, and therefore it needs hechsher. Zot Rashi weiter, but it's not an Abram in Avela because it's only a piece of basar. You don't say that. We look at it like this piece of meat hanging off the animal, fell off the animal before it died. It's not an Abram in Achai because it's not an Abram, it's just a piece of meat, and it's not part of the Avela. Never remember the letter the polygon of a Misai Nipol. Nobody argues over it. So we just quoted a Mishnah that says clearly that when an animal dies, any meat or aver that's hanging off of it is not going to become an avela. It's not part of the animal. So we've proven that Nisa Oisa Nipul. Gewaltig. Sagt die Gemara weiter. Shechita namitinina. We also have a Mishnah that proves to us that Shechita will not make nipple, and the Shechita will be good on the Shechita that you shekel an animal with will even work for the things that were hanging off it. Where do you see that? Because the Gemara, the same Mishnah says, Nishchita behema. What if the animal didn't die? If the animal was shechted, then hukshru b'dameh, then became hukshur with the blood of the Shechita. So if about the blood of the Shechita touches the animal, that's not only makshur the animal as an oichel to be mekabel tumah, it's also makshur the aver that's hanging, and it's also makshur the basar that's hanging. So you see clearly that the heter Shechita worked for the basar hamadaldal and for the aver hamadaldal. So zog to Gemara, Shechita nami tanina nishchad behema loy hukshru. Hukshru b'dameh, and the mayor of Shimon nami loy hukshru, because Reb Shimon knows if the dam from the Shechita went on the main behema, the two pieces of meat hanging off of it, the dam didn't touch that. So the question is, do you look at it like one unit, and if about the dam touched the neck, that's enough to be makshir everything l'kabel tumah, or maybe the aver hamadaldal and the basar hamadaldal have to independently have dam directly on them. But whatever the case, Kula Alma seems to agree that the Shechita is mitarit, and therefore side the aver hamadaldal, side the basar hamadaldal gets a hechsher from the Shechita. Zok Gemara, you don't necessarily have a raya. Imeahi havamina my hechshu abasar. Who said that the aver hamadaldal will not be tamei? Maybe it's just going on the basar that the Mishnah is referring to. Frankly, that can't be. Doesn't the hukshar loshen yachid? The huksharu, they both became hukshar. What both? Obviously, side the basar hamadaldal and side the aver hamadaldal. So the question is, why did Rabbi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef have to say in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that Shechita Eino Yosef Nipol and Misa Yosef Nipol? We've just demonstrated from a Mishnah these same halachas. So what is the chiddush of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef Amar Rabbi Yochanan? Sagt Gemara, Ma'u detema chad lebasar hapirish mina behema, the chad lebasar hapirish mina aver. Maybe the two things that we're talking about that are not tamei is basar hapirish mina behema and basar that's parish from the aver minachai. But the aver minachai itself maybe will be tamei machmas aver minachai, and therefore you don't have a raya that Shechita eino yosef nipol, because maybe the aver minachai would be tamei. We're only discussing a piece of meat that fell off the aver minachai. Right? The Gemara umay umad high. Why in the world should we make such a distinction between the meat that came off the animal itself or the meat that came off aver minachai? Why should you say they're different? Why would the Mishnah need to address each one individually to say hukshru? Zok to Gemara, I'll tell you why. So kedai dechamina hoil umatama tumah chamur agav ovid. The aver minachai is tamei tumah chamur, and therefore it's going to be tamei like an avatuma. Now, when you cut a piece of meat off of it, that piece of meat becomes tar because it's no longer part of the aver minachai. But you might think, since it was once itself an avatuma, maybe it shouldn't need to be hukshur l'kabel tumah, because something that started off as a real tumah shouldn't need hechsher. And we find such a precedent because nevelas oif tahor, since it's metama begadim beis abliya, if you swallow it, it makes a tumah chamura. Because of that, it doesn't need hechsher either. So you see a precedent that when something could be involved in a tumah chamura, it no longer needs hechsher. So I would have thought that this piece of basar that's hanging off of the aver minachai, maybe it wouldn't need hechsher at all. because as the word says, agav aviv, when it's connected to the Ever and Achai, therefore emo loyli boy hechsher. Maybe it shouldn't need hechsher shchita. Kamash malon that loyli boy hechsher shouldn't need hechsher lekabel tuma. Kamash malon it needs hechsher lekabel tuma. Amar Rabbi Yosef, in the kaiter of Yitzchak by Yosef biyadecha, you can take it to the bank. What Rabbi Yitzchak by Yosef said, and that is that ain't shchita is a nipple, meaning the shchita will work even for Abraham Adoldo, but misa is a nipple. And if a behemoth dies that has things hanging off of it, whether it's a bus or whether it's an aver, will not become tamei tumas nevela. You could take that to the bank. Why could you take it to the bank? The Rabbi Bar Chana because the great titan of Torah, Rabbi Bar Chana agrees with what Rabbi Yitzchak by Yosef said. Where do you see that? The Tanya, it says Ubasar Basada Treifa Loisha Ched. You're not allowed to eat treifa, and we learn from there Lahavi Ha'aver Ve'Abasar Hamiduldolan Bebehema Ubechayu Ba'if. If you had an aver or basar that was hanging off a behema chayu, exactly our discussion. V'shachtan, and you shechted them, shehei nasurin, that they're going to be asur. So far, we don't see that. We're trying to say that shchita works. But the Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Let's turn on to Daf Ayin Dalit, Amar Aleph. Ein bahan elo mitzvahs proish blavad. When the Brisa said that they're going to be tamei, it's and there's going to be an Israel Abraham Nachai. It's only the Rabbanon, as Rashi says on top. Elo mitzvahs proish, but alma. It's merely a mitzvah of the Rabbanon to stay away from it. Be the Rabbanon. The cross machta ba'alma. So what do you see from here? Alma ein shchita oisenipol. You see that when you shecht an animal that has an Abraham adulto or Basar adulto, the heter shchita will work for the Abraham adulto and for the Basar adulto. Gewaltig. Baruch Hashem, we were zeichen to finish of Ein Gimel. Okay. Tomorrow we'll learn of Ein Dalet. Hashem will be able to say Eidos on us. Aid that we're learning this Geschmack. We're learning it Geschmack.
Very good.
Okay, have a wonderful day.
Okay, very good. Have a great day. Shechita.